Chosen ones, the moment your aura rippled across the earth, it did not stop at the edges of your city or the threshold of your home. It pierced the heavens and traveled across oceans until it reached the halls of power few dare to enter. The White House, fortress of nations and seat of mortal authority, could not resist the tremor that followed the unseen light. Curtains shivered, though no wind was present. Lamps flickered, though no storm had come. And within the stillness of the Oval Office, the president felt it. He had faced wars, scandals, and storms of politics, yet none of them shook him as deeply as the silent press of your unseen fire. For what descended was not of men, nor of policy, nor of persuasion. It was an eternal force, born from a covenant older than the stones of Washington itself. His breath faltered, his hand trembled, and against the weight of his title, tears slipped silently from his eyes. Not tears of weakness, but of recognition. He was standing in the echo of something holy. The guards outside the chamber did not notice. The advisors nearby thought his silence was fatigue. Yet, in his chest he felt as though the foundations of his soul had been stirred. For in that single moment, he knew, power belongs not to thrones nor crowns, but to the unseen hand of destiny that moves through those chosen to carry it. The walls of that chamber, adorned with portraits of past leaders, seemed to lean closer, as though history itself bent its ear. The president whispered words no one else heard, his voice breaking. "What is this light?" But there was no answer, only the steady pulse of your aura, demanding no recognition, yet declaring everything without speech. It was then that he understood why ancient scrolls spoke of nations trembling when the heavens draw near. He realized the house he presided over was not just political. It had become a stage for prophecy to echo once more. The night was calm over Washington, yet within the heart of the White House, the air grew strangely heavy. The president sat alone, staring at papers that suddenly felt irrelevant against the force pressing invisibly upon him. It was not a storm outside, nor the echo of politics. It was something deeper, a presence that burned without consuming. The silence grew so profound that it felt alive, and within it a flame appeared, not with smoke or ash, but a brilliance that seemed to breathe. It did not burn in the fireplace, nor dance upon a candle. Instead, it hovered in the air, golden and fierce, flickering with a light that had no earthly source. The president rose to his feet, his hand trembling, as though reaching out might scorch him. Yet, when he drew closer, the flame did not destroy. It invited, and the air quivered with reverence. The Oval Office, a place of politics and strategy, became a sanctuary, its walls shimmering as if draped in an unseen veil. The flame pulsed once, and the president's breath caught. He remembered childhood prayers long buried beneath ambition. He recalled words his grandmother once whispered about a fire that guides the righteous and exposes the hidden. That memory clawed its way back into his heart with startling clarity. He realized this was no illusion of fatigue, no trick of the mind. This was an invasion from the realm beyond, where the language of heaven breaks into the silence of earth. He bowed his head without thinking, his power meaningless before this presence. The golden flame seemed to listen, to wait, as if demanding nothing yet offering everything. In its glow, shadows retreated to the corners of the room. Papers, pens, portraits, all seemed insignificant under the light that revealed something greater than nations or titles. The president felt stripped of every disguise, known completely, judged and yet not condemned. Then came the sound, not a voice, yet a resonance. The flame hummed with a vibration that shook his bones but steadied his spirit. It was the sound of destiny, echoing without words. He fell to his knees, overcome by a force he could not name. A foe. The chamber was quiet, though the president's soul was anything but. He remained seated at the edge of his desk, staring at the spot where the flame had flickered and vanished. His hand pressed against his chest as though steadying the rhythm of his racing heart, yet no measure of breath could bring peace. Something eternal had brushed against him, and it left behind a trembling that words could not quiet. The tears returned, slow and unbidden. They were not the tears of a man defeated by politics or weariness, but the tears of one who had glimpsed the edge of eternity. For years, he had stood behind podiums, declaring certainty to the people, projecting strength in times of chaos. But in this moment, he was stripped of ceremony. The weight of crowns and nations meant little under the gaze of the unseen. He realized that power, as the world knew it, was fragile when confronted with what lies beyond. In the silence, a scripture long forgotten came to mind, as though whispered into his memory. "Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted." The words struck him with a force that no speechwriter could craft. He remembered the name spoken by his mother in bedtime prayers, Yeshua, the one who walked among fishermen, kings, and beggars alike. The sound of that name hovered in his spirit now, as though it was the only key capable of unlocking the mystery of what had stirred in the room. The president lowered his head, ashamed of how long it had been since he had called upon that name. In a place where strategy and control had always dictated his decisions, the sudden recollection of Yeshua felt like an intrusion, yet also a lifeline. Was this the reason for the flame? Was the power of heaven demanding his attention, not as a leader of nations, but as a man who had forgotten the way home? The silence deepened, the walls of the Oval Office pressing close as though awaiting his response, but he could not speak. The weight of unspoken truth held him still. He wondered what would happen if he dared to call upon that name aloud, if he surrendered for even a moment the illusion of control. Beneath the foundations of the Capitol, where marble monuments mask the soil of forgotten battles, there are chambers sealed away from public knowledge. Historians whisper of tunnels and secret vaults, but few know the depth of what rests beneath Washington. The president, shaken by the flame, found himself drawn into those corridors days later, guided by a restless instinct he could neither explain nor silence. Accompanied by only a single guard, he descended into the cold stone passages that wound beneath the White House. The air was damp, laced with the scent of age and secrecy. Every step echoed like a question, reverberating against walls that had listened to centuries of buried voices. At the farthest end of a dim passage behind a door sealed with iron lay a chamber almost forgotten. Its walls bore inscriptions not crafted by modern masons, but carved in symbols of an older tongue. The guard hesitated, unnerved by the atmosphere, but the president pressed forward. In the center of the chamber, resting upon a pedestal of stone, was a scroll. It was bound in leather, cracked by time. Its edges yellowed, yet preserved as though it had been waiting for this exact moment. The president's hand trembled as he reached toward it, sensing that what lay within was not merely history, but revelation. When he unrolled the first fragment, his eyes widened. The letters were ancient, yet some part of his spirit recognized them, as if he had always known their cadence. The words spoke of a light that would pierce nations, of a flame that would awaken leaders and expose the hidden. They told of an aura carried not by kings or rulers, but by those chosen before time was measured. The scroll described a visitation that would unsettle thrones and summon truth into halls of power. The president's breath caught. He remembered the flame, the silence, the tears that had carved his soul open. This was no coincidence. The chamber, the scroll, the prophecy, it all converged in one thread that now tightened around his destiny. He lifted his gaze to the shadows, a sense of being watched by eyes unseen. That night, sleep would not come. The president lay in the great house that had held so many before him, its walls thick with history, its windows shadowed by the silence of midnight. Yet even in the quiet, his spirit churned. The scroll's words would not release him. They burned within his chest, calling forth something he could not suppress. His eyes closed against exhaustion, but what came was not rest. It was a vision. He found himself standing in a vast plain, endless and barren, stretching beneath a sky alive with trembling stars. A wind rose, carrying with it a sound that seemed to echo from eternity itself. He turned, searching for its source, and there, upon the horizon, a figure approached, clothed in light too radiant for earthly eyes. The ground trembled beneath each step, and the stars themselves bowed low as if surrendering their brilliance. The president fell to his knees, unable to hold the gaze of the one who drew near. And then he heard it, the voice. It was not thunder nor whisper, but something in between, resonating through every part of his being. The voice spoke his name, not as the world called it, but in a way that revealed the depth of who he truly was. And with that sound came a flood of memory, of every choice, every hidden thought, every forgotten prayer. Then came a name, clear and unshakable, spoken not by the president but by the heavens themselves. Yeshua. The sound of it split the sky, reverberating with a power that made the barren plain quake. The figure of light raised a hand, and in that gesture was both mercy and command. The president felt the weight of his soul exposed, every ambition stripped away until nothing remained but the raw truth of who he was before eternity. Tears surged again, but in this vision they were not hidden. He cried aloud, and the ground drank his grief. The stars flickered, the wind howled, and still the name of Yeshua lingered like fire upon his heart. He tried to speak it back, but his lips faltered, as though unworthy to carry such a sound. Morning light broke over the city, but the president felt no warmth in its rays. The vision clung to him like a shadow, impossible to shake, impossible to forget. The name spoken in that dream still pulsed in his spirit, and though he had not uttered it aloud, the echo was enough to unsettle his every step. He returned to his duties, yet every word spoken in meetings seemed hollow, every signature meaningless compared to the memory of that shining figure. His advisors noticed the shift in his demeanor, though none dared ask. They saw a man troubled, but they could not see what storm had gripped his soul. Late that evening, he returned once more to the hidden chamber beneath the White House, the place where the ancient scroll lay waiting. He unrolled it again, his hands steadier this time, though his heart thundered with anticipation. The faded ink revealed more lines than he remembered, as if the scroll itself had decided to unveil a deeper layer. It spoke of a time when light would pierce nations, when an aura, not bound by earthly crowns, would sweep through the highest and the lowest alike. It declared that no fortress, no throne, no gate of power could withstand the brilliance of this chosen radiance. The president traced the words with his finger, breathless. He knew this was more than metaphor. It was prophecy unfolding before his very eyes. The flame he had seen, the tears he had shed, the vision that called his name, everything pointed back to the aura spoken of on this scroll. He began to wonder if what had entered the White House that night was not simply a visitation, but the very fulfillment of what had been written long ago. Yet the scroll ended not with comfort but with warning. It spoke of nations trembling, of leaders undone, of secrets brought into the open by the piercing glow. The aura would not be controlled or silenced. It would reveal, it would ignite, and it would separate truth from falsehood. The president closed his eye, realizing the light was not merely blessing, it was also judgment. The White House had always carried an air of solemnity, but in those days it became something else entirely. Staff moved through corridors unaware of the shift, yet the president felt it with every breath he drew. The air was charged, as though invisible footsteps walked alongside the living. At first, he dismissed it as paranoia born from sleepless nights, but soon he could not deny it. He was not alone in those halls. It began in whispers. Late at night, when the building should have been silent, faint sounds stirred in the distance, like voices carried on a wind that did not exist. Guards reported seeing flickers of light down corridors, mistaking them for faulty bulbs, yet no technician could find the cause. The president himself walked those halls and saw it, streaks of radiance gliding along the marble, vanishing before his eyes. Then came the presence, undeniable and overwhelming. One evening, while passing beneath the painted ceiling near the east room, he felt it descend. His knees buckled, though no one touched him. The atmosphere thickened with a holiness that words could not capture. It was then he saw them, not in fullness, but in flashes of form. Wings stretched wider than doors, eyes like fire, garments shining brighter than polished gold. Angels. They walked the halls of power, as if they had always belonged there. Yet their gaze was fixed not on politics, but on eternity. The president dared not speak, for his tongue felt heavy, but in his heart he heard the resonance of a truth he had long avoided. A scripture surfaced unbidden, words once dismissed, but now alive. The Lord of hosts surrounds his people, even as fire encamps around them. And in the midst of that verse, the name returned, Yeshua. The angels bore the weight of that name, their very presence declaring it without speech. He understood then that what had entered the White House was not a passing sign but a heavenly invasion. Yet their faces, though radiant, were not gentle. Their eyes pierced him, seeing deeper than flesh, and he trembled. For he knew angels were messengers, not ornaments. They had not come to admire walls or history. They had come with purpose. The Pentagon prided itself on order, secrecy, and control. But what unfolded there defied every measure of protocol. In the weeks following the president's encounters, strange reports began to surface from the most secure chambers. At first, they were whispers, dismissed as stress or coincidence. Yet as the days grew darker, The evidence mounted until even the highest-ranking officials could no longer look away. It began with the surveillance feeds. Cameras positioned in restricted areas flickered with bursts of white light, frames blurred by shapes that could not be explained. Technicians reviewed the recordings repeatedly, but each time the same mystery returned. Wing-like shadows stretched across corridors, movements not bound by human pace. Entire sequences dissolved into brilliance that forced viewers to shield their eyes. Still, none dared to describe it aloud, for fear of ridicule or reprisal. Then came the testimonies. Soldiers stationed in late-night watches reported voices echoing in empty halls, words spoken in languages they could not recognize. Some swore they heard chanting that rose and fell like waves. Others claimed they saw figures of light pacing the perimeters, radiant forms that vanished when approached. The accounts were collected, stamped classified, and buried beneath layers of silence. But the silence could not smother the truth. It only deepened the unease. One general, hardened by years of conflict, confided privately to the president that he felt something ancient stirring. He spoke with trembling lips of a dream that had haunted him, a sword of fire descending upon the nation, dividing truth from lies. The president listened without interruption, for he too had seen signs that mirrored the general's words. Both men realized, without speaking it aloud, that they were caught in the same current of revelation. The Pentagon, fortress of earthly defense, was powerless against the unseen force invading its walls. No strategy, no command, no weapon could repel it. The aura that had entered the White House was spreading, seeping into the veins of the nation's most guarded stronghold. Those who encountered it were left undone, their certainty stripped, their secrets threatened. It began quietly, almost imperceptible at first, like the stirring of wind before a storm. Across the nation, ordinary citizens awoke with the same sensation, the sense of being seen, known, weighed by a presence they could not name. Dreams filled with fire and radiance unsettled the hearts of farmers and bankers alike. In cities, strangers reported glimpses of glowing figures reflected in windows, dissolving the moment they turned to look. In the countryside, families spoke of nights where the sky itself pulsed with colors unseen before, hues that shimmered like the edge of eternity. News networks tried to explain the phenomenon. Some called it atmospheric disturbance, others speculated about military experiments. But no broadcast could quiet the trembling that swept through the land. Churches filled with people who had not prayed in years. Streets grew hushed at odd hours, as if the very ground held its breath. The aura that first touched the White House was now moving beyond its walls, spreading like a tide that no border could contain. The president watched with both awe and dread. Each report that crossed his desk echoed the prophecy of the scroll. The light was not selective. It appeared to the powerful and the powerless, to the young and the old. And everywhere it went, it revealed the hidden. Secrets buried for decades began to surface. Corruption, long concealed, was suddenly exposed in documents, in confessions, in unexpected collapses of systems thought unshakable. Amid the chaos, a thread of hope wove itself. In the trembling of the people, many began to remember words of old, promises of a kingdom not built by human hands. Whispers of Yeshua surfaced again, spoken in homes, murmured in gatherings, sung in streets by those who could no longer contain the fire burning in their hearts. It was as if the nation itself was being called to remember a forgotten name, a name written into the foundation long before monuments rose and governments were formed. The night was heavy over the capital, a silence that pressed down as though the heavens themselves were leaning close. The president could no longer bear the weight of what he had seen. Alone in the Oval Office, he dropped to his knees, his chest heaving with the kind of sob that strips a man of pride. His tears soaked the carpet as a cry rose unbidden from the depths of his soul. It was not a calculated prayer, not a crafted speech. It was raw, desperate, uncontainable. The sound of his weeping seemed to break something open in the unseen realm. The room trembled, the windows rattled, and the very air thickened with a force that felt alive. Then it came, a roar, not from the earth but from above, as though the heavens themselves had answered his cry. The light descended with ferocity, brighter than the flame he had once seen, encompassing every corner of the chamber, until shadows had no refuge. In the midst of the brilliance, the president heard the sound of voices, multitudes layered upon multitudes, chanting in perfect unity. It was not the language of men, yet his heart understood. They cried out a single name, again and again, like thunder rolling across eternity. Yeshua. The name filled him, split him open, burned away every false strength he had carried. His cry, once weak and broken, was now joined with theirs, a sound that shook the very foundations of power. The walls of the White House seemed to bend beneath the weight of glory. Portraits of presidents past appeared to waver, as though history itself bowed to the one whose name was being exalted. The president lifted his face, eyes blinded by tears and brilliance, yet he felt no fear. For the first time he understood that surrender was not loss. It was the doorway into something greater than thrones, nations, or crowns. Outside, guards rushed to their posts, unsettled by the quake they could not explain. Across the city, dogs howled, alarms sounded, and citizens awoke with pounding hearts, as if they too had heard the cry that rose into the heavens. But as the light intensified, one truth became terrifyingly clear. Once the heavens answer, they never remain silent. What had begun in secret was now unraveling into the open, and the nation would not remain untouched. The city awoke restless, though dawn had not yet broken. A heaviness lay over the streets, a sense that something irreversible was taking place beyond the reach of human control. In the White House, the president stood at the window, his reflection pale against the darkness outside. He could still feel the echo of the cry that had torn from his chest the night before, the roar that had summoned the heavens. His body trembled, as though the sound still lived within his bones. On his desk lay the ancient scroll, its leather binding cracked, its letters glowing faintly, as if fire had seeped into its ink. He unrolled it one final time, and his breath caught. Words that had not been visible before now burned upon the parchment, clear and undeniable. They spoke of a seal, the last mark upon a nation that had been weighed in the balance. It declared that once the seal was placed, no ruler, no army, no law could alter the course set in motion. The nation would stand before the gaze of heaven, naked and uncovered, judged not by its monuments, but by its heart. The president reached out, his fingers brushing the scroll, and a current surged through him. Images flooded his mind. Crowds trembling before radiant skies, rivers of people falling to their knees, cities bathed in fire and light. He saw leaders stripped of power, their words silenced before the voice of eternity. He saw the earth itself shudder as if straining to bear the weight of what was descending. And, at the center of it all, a light brighter than the sun, a throne that no hand could topple. The president staggered back, gripping the edge of his desk, his tears falling freely. He realized the seal was not a symbol carved by men. It was a decree spoken from the throne of heaven. America had been marked, its destiny bound to something beyond borders or time. The final seal was not the end of power, but the unveiling of truth. Yet even as the vision faded, one question tormented him. If the seal had already descended, was it a seal of mercy, or was it the seal of judgment? The answer lingered just beyond his reach, waiting in the silence that followed.
If you have come this far, it is crucial that you watch this next video here. But be warned, it is not for the faint of heart, for only the true chosen ones can handle this video. If you would like to also donate to help keep the channel going, our Buy Me a Coffee link will be in the description.